going to happen now is the Rebbe is going to present us with an explanation for why Torah is the source of peace. And it's really interesting because it's actually really logical. Upsettingly so, if I may say so. The Rebbe's idea is very interesting. And what the Rebbe does to make his case is use numbers 1, 2, and 3. Torah is the number 3. The Torah was given in the 3rd month. The Gemara says that everything about Torah goes in 3. It was given in the 3rd month, on the 3rd day, by the 3rd child. The Torah has 3 parts. A whole bunch of 3s. Everything goes in 3. And the Rebbe is going to use the number 3 to argue the idea that Torah is connected to peace. Okay, Davai, let's go. Page 10, bottom of the 2nd column. Please follow inside. Okay, darf men frier magdim sein. In order to explain the relation between Torah and peace, and again, as I explained to you in the last few minutes of the previous class, it's not peace. It's peace in spite of principle. In spite of principle. I believe what I believe. You believe what you believe. And we disagree vehemently. But we don't hate each other. Okay, that concept of peace, which is called Shalom Amiti, is connected to Torah. How do you explain it? But the pasuk is Madgish. We have to preface first what the pasuk says. Vayichan Loshen Yochid. And he, the Jewish people as a singular unit, rested adjacent to the mountain. Says that it took place by Chodesh Hashlishi in the 3rd month. Let's say it's Bnei Yisrael at the time after the Jewish people left the land of Egypt. But the fun is verstandig. If you understand the meaning of the number 3, you will understand as the Vayichan is verbunden mit der Meile von Mispah Shlishi, that the idea of resting and becoming a unit is connected to the number 3. And again, I sound like a broken record, but some records are meant to be broken. In this Sicha, it's not about a Neshama unity, it's about a Torah unity. And the Torah unity is connected to the number 3. Page 111. Just the underline, please follow. Der chiluk in remes, hatoichem, the difference in the hint of the substance. Tzivishon di misparim echad, sheni, und shlishi. What's the difference between uno, dos, and tres? Achat, shtayim, shalosh. What's the difference? Is echad, the number 1 is madgish, underscores, as is da melechatchila not ein zach. All you have is one thing. If all you got is one thing, you have no choice but to get along, right? You can't argue with yourself unless you're a Meshuggah. Sheni weist auf Chalkus. The number 2 obviously shows on division. Heipach ha'ach is the opposite of 2 because when you have more than 1, you got more than 1. Top of the 2nd column, page 111. Und der Uftuf and Shlishi is, what is special about the number 3 is, the 2 which are by themselves distinct and separate are joined. Okay, does anybody disagree with those interpretations? 1 means there's nothing to fight about. 2 means division. 3 means we get along in spite of our differences. That's the Rebbe's position. Now, Vibal, that's page 112 now. Vibal, that's Chazal verbinden Torah. Bichlal, mit Mitzvah Shlishi, we know that the Gemara says that the Torah is always connected to the number 3. Is therefore verstandig. This indicates, this means to say, as klolus inyan Torah, the Torah as a whole is bedugmas ha'inyan von shlisha machriya, is similar to the idea of the 3rd who agrees. You see, if you and I disagree, and she gets involved in the argument, yeah, is she a 3rd opinion? She either agrees with you or she agrees with me, correct? So we still have 2 opinions, and then she gets involved. What do we got? 2 opinions. She gets involved, what we have 2 opinions, just more people screaming and shouting, right? But there's something called Shlisha Machriya. The 3rd person, they listen. They pay attention. And they listen to what Reuven says, they listen to what Shimon says. They don't take a side. By hearing both voices, they find the truth. This is called Hachra'ah. Hachra means resolution. I don't want to use the word compromise, although it could be interpreted as such. Hachra means you find the place where the 2 opinions actually agree, if you go deep enough. So you have every day we say it in davening. The 3rd opinion is not agreeing with A or B, it's a 3rd opinion that's resolving the difference. Now, It could be that outwardly he's agreeing with me or he's agreeing with you. Possible. But what he's doing is not saying, I'm taking a side, I like you better than her. What he's doing is he's going deep enough into the idea to find the place where the two opinions converge, where the two become one. So in Torah, and you have this in Mishnah, in the Gemara, you have it in Gemara, and you have it in Chassidus, it's called Shlishi HaMachriya, where the third guy is not just agreeing with one or the other, he's resolving the conflict by going deeper. He's not taking a side, it's not two against one. It's one against one, and some guy who's able to find the place where those two would converge and become one. That's called Hachra. So the Rebbe says the whole Torah, the entirety of the Torah, is like the third guy who's making resolution. Now, do Jews argue about absolutely everything in Torah, or there's some things they don't argue about? So we're going to say, for the purposes of this conversation, because this is what we want the answer to be, that there are things that nobody argues about. What? We're going to make believe that the correct answer to the question, there's some things Jews don't argue about, because this is the answer we need for our discussion. Says the Rebbe, if there's an issue in Torah that we all agree about, we still say Torah is given in the third month, on the third day, by the third child, and the Torah is a book of 3. Why? Because even when Yidden don't argue about a particular idea of Torah, we don't say he's one day. We say he's the depth of what would happen if there was an argument. And that's what the Rebbe is proposing. Torah is connected to the number 3, not only in those parts of Torah where there's an argument. Torah is connected to the number 3 absolutely, meaning, even if there's a point in Torah where there's no contention, nobody disagrees, the Torah brings out an opinion that has a depth as if there was an argument and there was a third guy who agreed. That's the proposal that Rebbe is making. The Gemara says in Masechta Shabbos that it's called Orient Lisai, the Torah of 3, La'amat Lisai, to the nation of 3, Kailam V'Yisraelim, B'Yomet Lisai, on the third day, Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, Ayadei Lisai, to the third child, Aaron, Miriam, Aaron, Moshe. And it's a Torah of 3, Torah V'Im, Ksuvim, and the Rebbe brings always Nasichas that this is gone on the margin of the Gemara himself. So the whole, everything about Torah is 3. Says the Rebbe, you know what that means philosophically? It means that the Torah has an integrity as if every single point in the Torah was argued and they came to a depth of not compromise, but resolution, unity, hachra, and even issues in Torah that nobody argues about is connected to 3. It has the depth as if there was an argument and the argument was resolved. That's the Rebbe's proposal. That's what the Rebbe just said. I want to read it again. Bitte, I'm reading it again. Okay? Page 112, first underline. Wie bald das Chazal verbinden Torah bechlal mit dem Mitzvah von Shlishi. Since the rabbis, the Gemara, connects Torah as a whole to the number 3, is der fun verstandig. This means to say, as klolos inyan Torah, the whole idea of Torah is bedugmas, who speaks Hebrew. Bedugmas, similar to ha'inyan von Shlisha Machriya. Even if there's an inyan of Torah that nobody argues, everyone agrees. But the connection between Torah and the number 3 denotes that idea that everyone agrees on is as if they disagreed and they came to a depth called Hachra, Shlisha Machriya. It's a philosophical idea. Torah is not an opinion. It's true. Because it incorporates all possible opinions and it comes to a depth, a place where they agree. Most issues in Torah they argue about and they have to find that depth. Issues in Torah that they never argued about. In the first place, Torah finds that depth by itself, and that's why Torah is connected to the number 3. Now let the Rebbe do the talking, okay? Let's go. Let's haste in other words. Afilu in di erter, even in those cases. For the psak halacha von Torah, with the verdict, with the resolution of the Torah, is begolui nitan even von achra. It's not resolution, it's not making both people right, it's either taking one side over another, or issues where nobody argued about in the first place. Says the Likutei Rebbe, I'm only reading the underline, is as obar be'amitis or be'pnimis. The truth is, and the depth is, an inyan von achra. Even when something in Torah is not like a third entity that's being machriya, that's resolving. The difference is every idea in Torah is on that level. Because when rabbis argue, and they argue quite vehemently, vociferously, passionately, and then they paskin, the halacha is like you and not like him, then the rabbis who disagreed before, maskim tzuder halacha, agreeing with the opinion which they did not hold before, not just practically, also in their minds, says the Rebbe in Yiddish, legt sich up wie die halacha, it suddenly resonates with them also that what the halacha was determined is true for them as well. And azoi, in such a way, as Ezverta Shalom Amiti creates true peace zwischen Yaladeis from the various opinions. And here the Rebbe uses the word Amiti, Shalom Amiti. So rabbis argue. And then they sit around and they get together and say he's right and he's wrong. Now sometimes when you say he's right and he's wrong, we're just simply taking a side. Sometimes when we say he's right and he's wrong, we find a depth that incorporates both opinions that comes to a resolution. But the Rebbe says whether the rabbis simply choose one side over the other, or the rabbis find an emek ashava, a depth which incorporates both deists, the losing rabbi now agrees with the winner. He actually understands that what they're doing the other way is actually correct. His brain changes. During the argumentative stage, they argued. Once they found a way of determining what the law is, either by choosing one opinion over the other, or by finding resolution which incorporates both theories, the opposing point of view, the one who lost the argument, now understands and agrees with the winning point of view. And that sounds like politics and diplomacy and doublespeak and manipulation, right? You know that the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbe Chayabushka, was a very, very smart lady. She was an incredibly intelligent woman. And she had her opinions about everything. And she voiced her opinions to people who knew her. So I know more than one story where there'd be an issue raised, politics or social science, and the Rebbetzin would say what she thought. And then someone at the table would say, the Rebbe, your husband spoke about this, and he said differently. So immediately she would say, my opinion is, and she'd repeat her husband's opinion right away. So you look and say, she was a weak woman, she was second class, her husband wore the pants in the house, and whatever he said she followed, and she didn't have her own mind. But that's really not true. That's not who she was. She was very intelligent, she had very strong opinions, but she knew that her husband is on a higher level, not because he's smarter than her, because he's inspired. And when she changed her opinion like this, and she said, my opinion is such, she actually understood why. So the Rebbe says, whenever rabbis argue and they determine a halacha, all now agree to the position of the halacha. The ones who before disagreed have changed their opinion, they agree with the halacha. Now the question is two parts. Number one, what's the proof? And number two, how's it possible? If you and I had this big argument and then everyone decided that you're right and I'm wrong, why would all of a sudden agree with your opinion? And the Rebbe is actually going to explain it to us. The Rebbe is actually going to offer us an explanation, and you know what? When we hear his explanation, we'll agree that it actually makes sense. But you have to add one detail to the conversation. For people to disagree. And then for another chalverman, a third guy to get involved and to decide like one or like the other. And then all three agree. You have to add one more component. You know what that component is called? It's a big bad word. It's a big bad word, very dangerous word, very painful word. It's called reality. Life. Torah is not philosophy. Do you understand? It's life. Ideas you can argue till the cows come home. And by the way, the answer to most arguments in the level of ideas is who cares? My students ask me, Rabbi, do we really have free will? We don't have free will. You know what my answer is? I don't care. If it feels like free will and it looks like free will, it's free will. Conversation over. Yeah, but Rabbi, it doesn't make sense. And do me a favor. Don't beat a kettle. Torah is not philosophy. It's teaching us how to live actionably, practically. When you add the idea that what Torah teaches you is actionable, you understand it differently. And that's what happens in arguments. Rabbis argue. And one guy comes along and he adds to the argument the element of reality, and everyone says, oh, let's keep going, okay? Let's keep reading. Page 112, second column. Das is the keach von Torah. It's the power of Torah. Adonai oiz la'ame yitain, Adonai yevarech hasame b'shalom. Hashem has given us oiz. That means power to bring together opposites. And Hashem has blessed us with peace. And he explains. Frides faran, di shakle v'tarya in the minyan shabbatera. First of all, there's a give and take. There's a discussion. There's an argument about an idea. Svaras v'kan, svaras v'kan. I say this, you say this. We take up different positions in the argument. B'shas ober. When, however, men kum tzu, we reach the point to der hachra v'hachlata von Torah, the resolution and decision of the Torah, and it may be v'eineh from these fathers, it's following one theory and not the other. Was there two dafen haben the minyan ha'ois, to figure out who's right, figure out if I should listen to Reuven, listen to Shimon. You have to have resoluteness, you have to have strength. Not strength to say, I don't care what you think. Strength to think it through and decide who's right. The teikef ha'achlata, the hardness of resolution to milchama, to a disagreement, to milchama haben the verschiedene ertias, to fight against the various other leanings in the shakel v'tari, in the discussion, in the dialogue, in the debate. Und machriya sein v'einef, and resolve like one way. So the ois means the toughness and the fortitude and the principle to go in one direction and the other direction, not let any winds move you off your choice. And then the Rebbe says, Vertenoch shalom, that's followed by peace. As alle days, all of the opinions, seinen denoch made, they eventually come to a place where they acquiesce, where they agree, where they concede to the halacha, to the law, with their entire form, they form a true joy, peace between them. And again, the Rebbe puts into the word emes. They argue. Rabbis argue, people argue. I watch myself and I watch people all the time. When I was younger, I would argue about everything. I mean, I had chavrus, I just argue. And I would get very stuck. I couldn't listen to what the other guy was saying. I couldn't hear his point of view. And the arguments were always butting heads, always screaming at each other. When I got older, I didn't have the strength to scream at my friends anymore. I didn't have enough koyach. And I realized how stupid it is. I still argue, don't misunderstand, but I try not to. The beginning of stopping to argue is beginning to listen. You have something to say, I have something to say. I'm emotional, you're emotional. The ideas can speak to each other, the emotions don't let. Because I am upset that you're disagreeing with me. The emotion doesn't let me hear you. I have no patience. When I would argue with my friends, I never had patience to listen to them. And the reason was I didn't have enough time. The truth of the matter is, had I listened to them, I would have actually saved time. But I was young and headstrong. People who learn how to listen don't always find out that they're right, but they always find out what the truth is. And that's a lot more important than being right. And that's what the Rebbe is saying. Torah is a book that lends itself to a variety of views, as machlokes, disagreements, and the machlokes are serious. But Torah also gives us the power, number one, to figure out which position is true, and number two, to reach a place of integrity where all the other opinions then join. Not by compromising, but by emes. How does that work? If 5 minutes before you and I were screaming and shouting at each other, we couldn't agree, and now that it was determined that I'm right, of course I'm always right, you're always wrong, because how could it be any other way? Yeah, and then of course you agree with me. So the Rebbe says you got to add an element, which is the application of Torah to life. Bottom of page 113. I'm reading inside. Afal pi, as Torah is an inyan from Chachma v'Seichel. The idea of Torah is wisdom and intelligence, right? Wisdom and intuitiveness. Like the pasuk says, Kihi Chachmas Chalavinaschem. The whole point of Torah is to give us wisdom. The whole point of Torah is to give us understanding. Right now, you understand it your way, I understand it my way. I listen to you and I don't agree. You listen to me and you don't agree, so what's going to happen next? Says the Rebbe is Ober Farana Mailum Yuchedes in Torah. There's something which separates Torah from other wisdom. I want you to know that I'm in the midst of an argument with a rabbi about a very sensitive question about education.
You or
Me. I. And my whole ambition is to hear what he says. It's very important to me. It's not in my nature. My nature is I don't listen. I just talk. I have to break my nature and listen to him. But after I hear him out, then I need to make my own decision. So we're having this argument. And part of the argument, at least from my end, is not to let it become emotional. I want to know what he's thinking. And I'm not just going to follow him. Then after I understand what he's thinking, I'm going to make my own decision. But I have to be able to hear him. And he has to be able to hear me. Now, if he doesn't able to hear me, if he gets emotional and becomes an argumentative, it's his business. Because the end of the day is it's my decision. I'm consulting him about a question, but the decision is mine. I'm going to hear, and I hope I'm going to listen, and I'm going to hopefully open my mind to understand how he looks at it. And then I'm going to make the decision myself. When I make that decision, it'll be incorporating what he suggested, but it's not going to be his opinion, it's going to be mine. That's very, very hard to do. Now the reason it's so painful is because it's a chinuch question. What does that mean? There are children involved. They're real people. We're not talking philosophy, we're talking about real people. And real people are a part of the question. And the moment real people are part of the question, here's the tragic truth. If the people are different, the answer may be different, even though the Torah is one. The same Torah tells all people at all times to do the same thing, but when you have to determine what to do actionably, if you incorporate the element that you're dealing with people, it changes what the truth is. It changes the truth so much that everybody can understand that there's only one right way. When you argue before you incorporate the people element, you're arguing in theory, you have your opinion, I have mine, we can't agree. The third opinion is the third opinion rather than leaning in one direction or another, because the third opinion says, okay, you say this, now let's see how this plays out in the real world. And the Rebbe presents this to us by introducing us to a fascinating discussion. And the name of this discussion is Torah and Chochmah. Okay, let's begin. Are Torah and Chochmah synonymous or not? Are Torah and Chochmah one or are Torah and Chochmah two? Torah and Chochmah, two different things. Anybody just do I hear they're one? Anybody? Don't be afraid. I need to have an argument here, otherwise they're not Jewish.
It's one, because Hashem's wisdom is to...
Fair enough. So Torah is Hashem's wisdom, so wisdom is Torah. The difference between Chochmah and Torah is Chochmah is ideas. Torahs are ideas that you do. The integrity of Torah is not the theory. The integrity of Torah is that because of this theory, I'm going to make an action. That makes Torah very different than Chochmah. Chochmah is ideas in theory. Torah is ideas that are attached to life. So the argument is the Torah on a theoretical level. The resolution is when you take this theoretical argument and apply it to real people in the real world, in the real Torah. Let's do some reading. I'm starting from the beginning of the paragraph, 113, bottom of the second column. Afal pi as Torah is idea for Chochmah v'seichel. Torah is an idea of wisdom and intuitiveness. As the pasuk says, Ki chachmaschem v'vinaschem, Torah is your Chochmah and your Bina. Is all about, however, at the same time there is farana ma'ila miyuchedes in Torah. There's something distinctive about Torah. Vas Chochmah als Chochmah hates nit. That wisdom as wisdom doesn't have. Okay? U'b'lashen Chazal, in the language of the Medrash, yesh Chochmah b'goyim tam. And if someone says goyim have wisdom, it's true. Yesh Torah b'goyim al tam. And that the goyim have Torah, don't believe it. And I want to share with you a sweet story. Why do I want to share it with you? Because I chose to. That's the only reason. I am in Chinuch. I'm a teacher for 32 years. I started my first year was the summer of 1990, this winter of 1991, spring, fall. Fall, winter 1991. It's my 32nd year as a teacher. When I started out, I was a young schneckle and I knew everything. As time passes, I get dumber and dumber and I get more and more respected. I find that very strange, but that's the fact of life. When I started out as a teacher, my primary job was in yeshiva. And there were many senior teachers who are now deceased, who have now passed away alive. My first Rabbi Tenenbaum gave me, the principal of the school, Rabbi Tenenbaum, hired me. He passed away in 1993 or whatever, 94. And there's a whole series of people who I knew. They were seniors, they were on the way out, and I was a young guy. Some of them were Holocaust survivors who came to the United States and built families and built lives at superhuman cost and effort. And I was getting them on the downside. They were people in their 70s and 80s. One of those people was an elderly Jew who was incredibly sweet. He taught in the Lubavitch Yeshiva his whole life. His name was Rabbi Garfinkel. He was a 10th grade Rebbe, the 9th grade Rebbe in Ocean Parkway Yeshiva. Rabbi Garfinkel was a bacher. He was a very, very Hasidic bacher. He was an incredibly Hasidic bacher. I heard from people who knew him in Shanghai, in China. He was a very special person. He came to America, and for reasons I'm not going to get into, he was a little bit isolated from the Chabad community, for reasons that I can't get into. But in his heart, he was still a Chabadnik, even though in his outer appearances he was a little bit more modern. And he taught in the Lubavitch Yeshiva his whole life, till he passed away. So, probably when he was in his 80s, he came to our yeshiva, to Fabreng, and I actually wrote notes of that Fabreng, and I have it someplace in a folder. I sat next to him, and as he was talking, I was writing things down. And I found it amazing. You're talking now 1995, 1996, okay? It's more than 25 years ago that he came to this Fabrengen. And he sat with us and repeated a Fabrengen that he heard 40 years before. In 50 years before, in 1946. This is 1995, 50 years before. He was a Polish boy. He was a young kid. He was, 13, 14, 15 years old. And he was in the Lubavitch Yeshiva. And when the war started, the Bacharim didn't know what to do. And they were told, go to the Rebbe's apartment, where the previous Rebbe was staying in Varsha. And when the Bacharim came to the Frierdiker Rebbe, each boy would walk in, and the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him money, either 500 zlotys or 1,000 zlotys. It was a lot of money. And he said, go east. Initially, east was Vilna, and then later east was Russia, China, Japan, Shanghai. Those people who went home to say goodbye to their parents never got out. The people who didn't go home to say goodbye and went straight survived. They went to Vilna, which was on the Russian side of the partition, and when the Germans occupied Vilna, they went into Russia. They had the passports from Sugihara, the Japanese ambassador to Vilna, and 5,000 people were saved by this one Japanese man. And first they went to Kobe, Japan. They were in Japan itself. And then, December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacked the United States of America, so the Japanese became very paranoid, and they took all the foreigners who were living in Japan and moved them to China, to Shanghai. And in Shanghai, they suffered hunger and deprivation. It was very hard. They stayed there till the end of the war. Most of them survived. Almost all of them. Some died, but most of them survived. After the war, and the whole time they were learning and davening, all they could do. The settlement told them they were Chassidish Bachim, learning and davening. After the war, they got in a ship and they traveled eastward, right? They traveled eastward. They went around the world. They went from China through the Pacific till San Francisco, and then they traveled from San Francisco to New York by train. It took them more than a year. The war ended in April 1945. Okay, the Japanese war ended in August, September. They didn't get here till 46 and 47. It took them a long time to get here. They landed in San Francisco, their boat landed, and they took a train. I don't know the immigration details, why they were allowed into America. The bottom line is the group of Lubavitcher Bacharim who came from the Far East all became American citizens, as far as I know. He was in that group, and I knew a man who was not a Lubavitcher, who lived in Shanghai, who told me that Rabbi Garfinkel was the most outstanding bacher in the whole group. He was the most chassidish bacher. They came here for Purim. I don't know if it was 46 or 47, but their first Farbrengen was Purim. Now, in 1946 or 47, the Frierdiker was still alive. Remember, right? Right? So our Rebbe was not yet considered the Rebbe. He was called the Ramash, which is an abbreviation for his first name, Schneerson. This Rabbi Garfinkel, 50 years on, repeated the first Farbrengen that he heard from our Rebbe, who wasn't even the Rebbe. He remembered it so clearly. It was amazing. A kid should come from hell. And he lost his father, and he lost his mother, and he lost his brothers. He had nothing in the world except a shirt on his back. And he got married, and he had children, and he has a family. But then he was a bachel. Lands in New York, and the first time he's sitting at a Farbrengen here in New York, next to the Rebbe, was Purim. The Frierdiker was ill. They didn't even let him in to the Frierdiker Rebbe. They were bringing downstairs by the Rebbe, our Rebbe called the Ramash, and he was able to repeat to us the Farbrengen. What did the Rebbe Farbrengen about? This Medrash that we just learned. And I'm sharing it with you because I want to share it with you. I'm a funny guy, not funny ha ha ha, funny, interesting funny, and I wanted to share this with you. And what he said, he remembered the Farbrengen, he repeated it to us. That the Chazal say, Chochma yesh b'um is tamin. If somebody says non-Jews have wisdom, believe them. Torah yesh b'um is al tamin. If someone says Jewish people, the goyim have Torah, don't believe them. So what's in Chochma and Torah? Chochma means knowledge, ideas that appeal to the human mind. What is Torah? We recently had a sikha with a similar theme. Torah is also knowledge. But Torah incorporates into its knowledge, number one, something higher than knowledge, and number two, something lower than knowledge. What separates Torah from Chochma is that Chochma is strict logic. Chochma is a body of logic that carries ideas that are higher than logic and carries them down till the level of action. So the Rebbe said, if someone says Goyim have knowledge, it's true. If someone says Goyim have Torah, meaning that their knowledge is connected to something which is above reason, and therefore it comes down to a level below reason, meaning it translates into action, God didn't give them that. That gave them to us. That's the Taich Torah. The Rebbe is going to use this very argument that I just presented to you to explain his point. His point is going to be, if two people disagree, how do they suddenly not only find the correct way to do it, but how do they suddenly come to agree? And the answer is because we're not dealing with Chochmah, we're dealing with Torah. We're not dealing with knowledge and wisdom, we're dealing with Torah. What's the difference? The difference is the one I just gave you, that Torah is not only wisdom. It's a body of knowledge, it's very intellectual. But in the Torah you have what we call in our culture Ein Sof, the infinity of God. And in the Torah you have Lo HaMedrash Ikir, Ela HaMaaseh, that the Torah's purpose is to translate into behavior. When you add the idea above Chochmah and the idea lower than Chochmah to the Chochmah HaTorah, this is why one is called Chochmah and the other is called Torah. And in Chochmah you're not going to have Shalom Amiti. If they disagree, they're going to remain in disagreement. And Torah will allow for Shalom Amiti. And the clock has no heart and no mercy. And we got to stop. I was hoping to finish the Sikha today. We'll continue to Mitzvah Hashem next Wednesday. Thank you for coming and listening. Chazak.